Hello, hello, hello. There we go. There we go. There we go. All right. So I'm back doing some more narration work here in the chat. Please say hello, say hello, say hello, say hello. It is raining and thundering like mad here in New York, where I'm at. Probably washed out all the smokiness. Hopefully, the people in Canada are doing well with these fires and the conditions. Just getting a little crazy, a little bit. But oh wait. So, in case you haven't noticed, I am finishing up some work on some long form political narration. What it is, I can't tell you until it's done. So I put it out. Who it's for, I also can't tell you that either yet. Yeah. Do I kind of regret watching Trump's speech yesterday? Most likely. Hello, hello, hello. Hello. I probably do regret it. But considering I wanted to see what it was about since I missed it when it happened, I put myself through it. But enough time has passed a bit. I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Jay-Z. I'm doing good. Doing good. Let me get this up and running. Up and running. So I am doing more work on some narration that I'm doing. So that's what this is. And happening. There we go. There we go. There we go. All right. Everything's set up? Yes, I do. Here we go. Lassitude as a mechanism of control. Definitely not Argentina. I can tell you that much. I haven't watched the World Cup, but I do not want Argentina to win at all. I think Spain's in it in the final, right? I could be wrong, but I know Argentina's in it, and I don't want them to win. So, Lassitude as a mechanism of control. It is widely understood that CIA research spread LSD onto college campuses during the 1960s, contributing to the rise of drug culture, and this is largely undisputed. The CIA was paying the CIA was paying college students and prisoners to take LSD in order to study its effects. Some intellectuals seem to have enjoyed the experience, decided to keep using it, and even recruited their friends. The CIA was thoroughly disappointed in its hope that LSD could be used as a mind control drug. However, as John D. Marks quotes intelligence officials noting in search for the Manchurian candidate, the drug had another effect that proved very useful. This CIA, dis- this CIA veteran describes all the colors of the rainbow growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. He had always disliked the cracks as a sign of imperfection, but suddenly the crack became natural stress lines that measured the vibrations of the universe. The CIA official states, "You tend to have a more global view of things. I found it awfully hard, when stoned, to maintain the notion I am a U.S. citizen, my country, right or wrong. You tend to have these good higher feelings. You are more open to the brotherhood of man idea, and you are more susceptible to you are more open to the brotherhood of man idea, and you are more susceptible to the seamy sides of your own society." I think that's exactly what happened during the 1960s, but it didn't make people more communist. It just made them less inclined to identify with the US. They took a plague on both your houses position. The New Left of the 1960s was the perfect shield against the emergence of any mass communist movement, and the perfect vehicle. The New Left of the 1960s was the perfect shield against the emergence of any mass communist movement, and the perfect vehicle for deconstructing those that existed around the world. What was achieved on a society wide scale in Northern Ireland, Italy, and Jamaica could also be achieved with the individual human mind. To prevent a light switch effect, to avoid a David versus Goliath scenario, as Kitson and Lynn describe on the battlefield, could be done intellectually and psychologically with potential dissidents. The secret to defeating communism wasn't inducing massive fanatical anti communism. Instead, it was inducing a kind of weary, unenthusiastic plays on. Instead, it was inducing a kind of weary, unenthusiastic plague on both your house's position and getting potential dissident fanatics into a dull state of indifference, which instead, it was inducing a kind of weary, unenthusiastic plague on both your house's position and getting potential dissident fanatics into a dull state of indifference with a shades of gray perspective. The idea of avoiding direct confrontation to get what you want out of people is widely understood among sales and marketing researchers, as well as those who study the art of workplace management. The widely read 1937 self help book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, written by Dale Carnegie, contains this anecdote about how a manager convinced his employees to wear their hard hats. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator for an engineering program. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator for an engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to ensure that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on the job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority about the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often, after he left, the workers would remove their hats. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often, after he left, the workers would remove the hats. he decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hard hats, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it would always be worn on the job. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation, with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of the futility of criticism bristling on 1,000 pages of history. But what the CIA discovered about LSD and how it reduced its own officers to feel neutrality toward the American government and no longer be annoyed by cracks in the sidewalk points to something of far higher caliber. It also explains a huge amount about U.S. art, culture, and academic discourse, particularly in no It also explains a huge amount about U.S. art, culture, and academic discourse, particularly in regard to notions that are considered left. The main way anti establishment sentiments are contained among the U.S. population, the main intellectual counterinsurgency technique used today, seems to be inducing lassitude. Hey, Sophia. Sorry if I'm not going back and forth with the comments and everything. I'm in the middle of doing some work for a long form political narration. I'll try to interact with the chat as much as I can. But yeah. So it is Spain versus Argentina. Yeah, I want Spain to win. Went to Spain in March. Love that country. Love what they're standing for too. So yeah. What is lassitude? Merriam-Webster defines it in two ways. First, a condition of weariness or debility, and second, a condition characterized by lack of interest, energy, or spirit. Right here, we find the key to maintaining control, and we see the aim of the power structure when it perceives rising discontent. The goal is not to induce compliance through absolute terror of punishment and repression. In the long term, that will result in resentment. The goal is not to change our minds and convince us that the society we live in is acceptable. This is hardly possible, even under ideal conditions, as people always have something to be dissatisfied with. And especially as conditions worsen across the United States, it's a completely unrealistic goal. The power structure of the United States and the globalist imperialist system has devised a number of ways to induce lassitude, to make us passionless, without energy, without spirit, weary, debilitated, and thus not an obstacle in carrying out their transition to a low wage police state and moves toward war. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA brought forth various thinkers who fixated on the notion of fascism rather than using the economic definition pioneered by R. Palm Dutt and other communists during the Great Depression, that fascism was heavy handed state control used to impose degrowth to stabilize the economy amid a crisis of overproduction. The Frankfurt School cultural Marxists defined fascism rather than using the economic definition pioneered by R. Palm Dutt and other communists during the Great Depression, that fascism was heavy handed state control used to impose degrowth to stabilize the economy amid a crisis of overproduction. The Frankfurt School cultural Marxists defined fascism differently. Susan Sontag's New York Review of Books essay Susan Sontag's New York Review of Books essay Fascinating Fascism insisted that German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl's photo exhibit of African tribes was fascist because it contained certain themes. Sontag wrote, "Fascism also stands for an ideal, or rather ideals, that are persistent today under other banners. The ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the disillusion of alienation, and the ecstatic feelings of community, the family of man. Although the Nuba are black, not Aryan, Riefenstahl's portrait of them evokes some of the larger themes of Nazi ideology: the contact between the clean and the impure, the incorruptible and the defiled, the physical and the mental, the joyful and the critical." Sontag went on to explain that what she thought the fascist aesthetic was extravagant effort and the endurance of pain, the massing of groups of people, the turning of people into things, the multiplication and replication of things, and grouping of people things around an all-powerful hypnotic leader figure or force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in swelling numbers. Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motions and the congealed static virile posing. Fascist art glorifies surrender, it exalts mindlessness, it glamorizes death. Mass athletic demonstration, a choreographed display of bodies, is a high. Fascist art glorifies surrender, it exalts mindlessness, it glamorizes death. Mass athletic demonstration, a choreographed display of bodies, is a valued activity in all totalitarian countries. And the art of the gymnast, so popular now in Eastern Europe, also evokes recurrent features of fascist aesthetics. The holding in or confining of force, military precision. In both fascist and communist politics, the will is staged publicly in the drama of the leader and chorus. According to Sontag, a mass movement of any kind in which people are pulling together to work for a cause and feeding off each other's energy, encouraging each other to be stronger and moving in coordination. According to Sontag, a mass movement of any kind in which people are pulling together to work for a cause and feeding off each other's energy, encouraging each other to be stronger and moving in coordination is inherently fascist. The optimistic energy it gives off, we must assume, is also fascist. Hannah Arendt echoes these sentiments in her writing on totalitarianism. Her piece, Eichmann in Jerusalem, focuses on how the Nazi war criminal was an ordinary man who had been part of the YMCA before joining the Hitler Youth. The message is, on the surface, about nonconformity. However, when you dig a little deeper, the message is much darker. The evils of the Nazi regime and the Holocaust are not rooted in the breakdown of capitalism, but rather in the inherent barbaric and cruel nature of human beings. The piece is intended to warn against the danger of any kind of mass movement, in which the inherently cruel and evil rabble, with their banality of evil, can be unleashed. Theodor Adorno's The Authoritarian Personality comes to similar conclusions, arguing that the rise of Hitler was rooted in certain flaws of the human spirit, namely, the tendency of people to believe that right and wrong exist, light switch effect, David versus Goliath, and their ability to join some kind of mass movement and subordinate themselves to it in order to advance a cause they believe is right. The underlying message of all the New Left intellectuals promoted by the CIA, with their work published in Partisan Review, Paris Review, the Monat, and Encounter, magazines subsidized by the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program, is that passion, mass movements, and belief in truth are very dangerous. From the perspective of the CIA funded New Left, The ideal state of being is lassitude. If one becomes a partisan believer, a passionate activist for a cause, you are either a sucker and fool or worse, a brown shirt Eichmann in the making. Postmodernism, the philosophical postmodernism, the philosophical perspective. Postmodernism, the philosophical perspective of the New Left, rejects the notion that grand narratives of human society exist and derides all such ideologies and systems of thought as totalitarian. Instead, it celebrates deconstruction, i.e., taking apart such movements and deflating the passion and fanaticism that come with them, inducing lassitude. Luigi Mangione, the new abstract painter. At the same time the CIA was funding these intellectuals, it was also funding abstract art. The CIA intentionally worked to counter social realism with abstract expressionism. The CIA funded the work of Jackson Pollock. The CIA funded the work of Jackson Pollock, famous for splattering paint on a canvas. Michael Newberry, who has taught at Otis College of Art and Design, writes, the CIA and CCF used museums, philanthropists, foundations, magazines, both popular and literary, artists, musicians, critics, and intellectuals for their propaganda. Their stated aim was to win the cultural Cold War against the USSR. Anything that was anti communist was unimpeachable. Their idea was to promote new American art, literature, and music with the slant that it represented freedom. This art, specifically abstract art, broke fundamentally with European and Russian art. The CIA's intellectuals might not have known that they were subverting humanity by rejecting the cultural values of Western civilization. There are films of Pollock splashing and dripping paint without any hesitation on a canvas laid flat on the ground. I remember watching one of these films as an 8 or 9-year-old child in elementary school, and indoctrination that still makes me sick. These films were made to give the impression of a passionate genius at work by dignifying some pissing like gesture without thought, perception, or heart. Some have equated this to vomiting. Don't laugh. Some have equated this to vomiting, but don't laugh or dismiss this statement, as there are some have equated this to vomiting, but don't laugh or dismiss this statement, as there are contemporary postmodern artists who swallow colored liquid and then literally vomit it on canvases. Some have equated this to vomiting, but don't laugh or dismiss this statement, as there are contemporary postmodern artists who swallow colored liquid and then literally vomit it on canvases, consequently bypassing all aesthetic knowledge, emotion, and perception. The CIA psyop behind promoting Pollock was to send the message that genius is a blustering, nihilistic, crazed artist who is compelled to do senseless acts. They succeeded in confusing the hell out of the general public by undermining their sense of. I agree, Laura. I agree. I remember seeing this too, and I was like, what the hell is this? They succeeded in confusing the hell out of the general public by undermining their sense that art should be noble and inspiring. The CIA knew and was threatened by the knowledge that real art was the linchpin that empowers humans to feel the full power of their combined senses, thoughts, and emotions. Their evil psyop was to convince people that passion without reason or reality is genius. The bigger the farce, the more they can get away with. Through using abstract art, the CIA would drive a psychological wedge through the soul of not only Americans, but humanity as well. A Harvard-educated art blogger named Nancy Hills gives us a defense of Jackson Pollock and similar abstract art, which she admits is ugly. She writes, I believe ugly paintings threaten us because they're unfamiliar, unruly, and emerge unbidden without our consent. They subvert our need for control. It's like experience it's like experiencing a mutation causing unforeseeable consequences. They're unpredictable, unfamiliar, unrecognizable, and different than our recent work. In essence, Nancy Hills and Michael Newberry agree. Abstract art makes us feel scattered, lost, not in control, defeated, and unable to change the world around us. Abstract art puts us in a negative, defeated place of feeling disempowered. While at first we may panic if such an emotional state is induced or feel angrily insulted, after a while we accept it. The long term result of feeling unbidden without our consent The long-term result of feeling unbidden without our consent, experiencing a mutation, and having our need for control subverted for an extended period of the long-term result of feeling unbidden without our consent, experiencing a mutation, and having a need for control subverted for an extended period is a feeling of being psychologically defeated and bitterly accepting it. Lassitude. Rather than presenting the world as one full of contradictions and challenges, with an energizing battle between right and wrong taking place before us in which we can choose to be active participants, abstract art leads us to see the world as a mass of randomness and disappointment, inconsistency in which we are more or less powerless. This, of course, matches the postmodernist philosophy and its understanding of the universe, which was labeled by George Lukács as philosophical irrationalism. Michael Newberry's reflection on the films he was shown of Jackson Pollock's Michael Newberry's reflection on the films he was shown of Jackson Pollock speaks volumes. These films were made to give the impression of a passionate genius at work by dignifying a pissing-like gesture without thought, perception, or heart. The defeated mindset created by abstract art celebrates irrational emotional behavior, lashing out with no clear aim or goal as genius. Yes, in the minds of those with no conception of a real mass movement and no belief that we could create a society where healthcare is available to all, the idea of Luigi Mangione killing a billionaire CEO, inscribing political messages on the bullets, and composing a manifesto about vengeance and resentment, giving voice to the lingering anger and disappointments found throughout society, must indeed seem like an amazing art project. The media is all too happy to give nonstop coverage to this pessimistic Joker movie that appears to be playing out in real life. Giving, pub- Giving publicity to Mangione, presented as the pretty-faced tragic hunger artist who displays the widespread negative emotions with an ugly act of Giving publicity to Mangione, presented as the pretty-faced tragic hunger artist who displays the widespread negative emotions with an act of ugly, cathartic violence with no stated demand or goals is very safe. It boosts all the negative emotions, the bitterness, the feelings of being defeated, the desire to cathartically lash out with the lack of real goals, all the ugly components of an ugly painting, all necessary to induce a psychological state of lassitude among dissidents in the long term. Conditions are getting worse. We all feel bad. We all feel like punching somebody or maybe even shooting somebody. Mangione did it, so we can celebrate him for making our Mangione did it, so we can celebrate him for making our bitter complaints heard without building any movement for change or even putting forward any demands or even teaching us anything about the healthcare system or the unfolding crisis that we did not already know. We have a new anti hero in the cable news cycle. We can give a bitter grin and say, somebody killed one of the bastards. Good for them. We can then go back to observing the negativity all around us, feeling completely powerless, and resuming our usual state of lassitude. Do wackadoo. American song American singer-songwriter Roger Miller released a humorous novelty song in 1964. He sang, I hear tell you're doing well. Good things have come to you. I wish I had your happiness and you had a do wackadoo, wackadoo, wackadoo. They tell me you're running free. Your days are never blue. I wish I had your good luck charm and you had a do wackadoo, wackadoo, wackadoo. Socialism is largely considered in the American mind to be a movement based on jealousy. I was taught in elementary school that socialism and communism were everyone getting paid the same. Socialism is widely understood in the American mind to be the redistribution of wealth or moves to eradicate income inequality. It is not surprising that in a culture that values hard work, social mobility, and individual It is not surprising that in a culture that values hard work, social mobility, and individual initiative, it is viewed in a very negative light. However, if one reads the work of Karl Marx or even other socialist thinkers who preceded him, one will not find calls for equality of income. On the contrary, one will instead find calls for rational planning and centralization of the means of production for the purpose of greatly expanding the productive forces. The Communist Manifesto, for example, never calls for equality of wages or redistribution of income beyond vague references to an income tax system. The Communist Revolution is described by Marx this way. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. The problem with capitalism, Marx explains, is that it is unable to sustain increased living standards and instead creates frequent gluts, where poverty is created by abundance. It is enough to mention that it is enough to mention the commercial crises that by their period It is enough to mention the commercial crises that, by their periodical return, put the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trail. It is, in, it is enough to mention the It is enough to mention the commercial crises that, by their periodical return, that It is enough to mention the commercial crisis that, by their periodical return, put the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trial, each time more threateningly. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products but also the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that, in all earlier epochs, would have seemed an absurdity: the epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commercial Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization. too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they by which they are fettered, and so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, they are on the one hand by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces, on the other by the conquest of new markets, and by the more through exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more that is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and that is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The idea, according to Marx, is that once the means of production are centralized, economic growth can continue without any restrictions as technology advances. The level of wealth and abundance in society can greatly increase. As Engels puts it in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, but when once their nature is understood, they can, in the hands of the producers working together, be transformed from master demons into willing servants. The difference is as that between the destructive force of electricity and the lightning in the storm, and the difference is as that between the destructive force of electricity and the lightning in the storm, and electricity under command in the telegraph and the voltaic arc. The difference between a conflagration, the difference between a conflagration, the fire, the difference between a conflagration and fire working in the service of man. With this recognition, at last, of the real nature of the productive forces of today, the social anarchy of production gives place to a social regulation of production upon a definite plan, according to the needs of the community and of each individual. In fact, Marx makes clear that his vision of a world without classes or inequality is only possible once the rational planning of the means of production has created vast abundance. In Critique of the Gotha Program, Marx specifically opposed the notion of In Critique of the Gotha Program, Marx specifically opposed the notion of equality of income, even in a society. In Critique of the Gotha Program, Marx specifically opposed the notion of equality of income, even in a socialist society, saying it was unworkable. But one man is superior to another physically or mentally and supplies more labor in the same time or can labor for a longer time, and labor to serve as a measure must be defined by its duration or intensity. Otherwise, it ceases to be a standard of measurement. This equal right is an unequal right for unequal labor. This equal right is an unequal right for unequal labor. He went on to make clear that equality could only be achieved when growth has been unleashed to create a huge amount of wealth. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor, has vanished. After labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want. After the productive forces have also increased with the all around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribed on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. This notion of rational planning of the means of production, building up productive forces with a planned economy to eradicate scarcity and create a stateless, classless world on the This notion of rational planning on the means of production, building up productive forces with a planned economy to eradicate scarcity and create a stateless, classless world on the basis of vast abundance is completely contrary to what is widely believed by American socialists and communists. On April 28, 2020, leftist filmmaker Michael Moore touted his new climate change themed documentary, Planet of the Humans, by explaining that the problem with capitalism was it continued. On April 28, 2020, leftist filmmaker Michael Moore touted his new climate change themed documentary, Planet of the Humans, by explaining that the problem with capitalism was it continued generating wealth endlessly. We are supposed to need more, 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 more. This is killing the planet, and we never stop to say, do we have enough? When is enough? Enough. Actually, I think the word enough is the dirtiest word in capitalism because there's not supposed to be any such as. Actually, I think the word enough is the dirtiest word in capitalism because there's not supposed to be any such thing as enough because we are told we need more, and companies are punished by Wall Street if they don't do more and grow more. Growth is really the death of us. Marx spent his entire life showing that capitalism did not create endless wealth, that rather it had a boom bust cycle and frequent gluts of overproduction, value crisis, and this problem was exacerbated by technology creating the falling rate of profit. All of this necessitated centralization and rational planning of the means of production so growth and technological advancement could move ahead, no longer restrained by the irrationality of the market. However, this understanding is nowhere to be found among the American leftists who celebrate the murder of Brian Thompson. In their worldview, capitalism is greed and wanting more, and this is an inherent flaw in humanity. These are not the views of Marx or any these are not the views these are not the views of Marx or any of the 20th century communist governments. The entire purpose of their 5-year plans and mass industrialization campaigns was to create economic growth. The Communist Party of China obsesses over economic growth and has raised 800 million people from poverty. The Communist Party of China obsesses over economic growth and has raised 800 million people from poverty and created the second largest economy on earth. As Dugin explained in The Last War of the World Island, starting in the 1970s, communist groups began. As Dugin explained in The Last War of the World Island, starting in the 1970s, communist groups began to function as caricatures of themselves, repeating stereotyped propaganda cliches assigned to them by their enemies and functioning in opposition to actual socialist planning in the USSR and China, while serving the Atlanticist international order. Instead of strengthening its influence in the global leftist movement according to geopolitical interests, the USSR adopted those propaganda cliches that had been implanted into this movement by the pro-capitalist bourgeoisie powers interested in weakening the civilization of the land and strengthening the sea civilization. The representatives of the Fourth International, the Trotskyists, played a special role in this. Already radical opponents of Stalin and his policy of building socialism in one country from the 1920s and 1930s, Trotskyites made the USSR their main enemy And in this fight with the USSR, they joined with all the powers that they could, including those they considered their class enemies. Hatred toward the USSR and Stalin became a main feature of Trotskyism and led many of its representatives to side with the liberal camp and join the ranks of the more consistent and radical Atlanticists. These groups contributed heavily to tearing the international left, and more importantly, the communist movement away from the USSR beginning in the 1970s. Because of these processes, the USSR's network of influence in countries outside of direct Soviet control was undermined, weakened, and partially removed from the coordinated control of Moscow. The views of leftists who oppose The views of leftists who oppose capitalism because there's never enough and growth is really the death of us are the views of Margaret Sanger after she denounced Marxism and embraced neo-Malthusianism and established the Birth Control League. Sanger condemned Marxism, writing, "No true solution is possible to continue this analogy until the worker is awakened to the realization that the roots of his malady lie deep in his own nature, his own organism, his own habits. To blame everything upon the capitalists and the environments produced by capitalism is to focus attention upon merely one of the elements of the problem. The Marxian too often forgets that before there was a capitalist, there was exercised the unlimited reproductive activity of mankind, which produced the first overcrowding, the first want. This goaded humanity into its industrial frenzy, into welfare and theft and slavery. Capitalism has not created the lament. Capitalism has not created the Capitalism has not created the lamentable state of affairs in which the world now finds itself. It has grown out of them, armed with the inevitable power to take advantage of our swarming, spawning millions. These ideas that Margaret Sanger and her wealthy financiers, who sponsored the Birth Control League, put forward in opposition to Marxism, have become synonymous with Marxism, socialism, communism, and leftism in the public mind. Furthermore, these ideas do not oppose capitalism, they oppose growth. They oppose the expansion of the population, the increasing of consumption, the raising of living standards, etc. If growth is bad, we should, of course, embrace lassitude. And why not be better at individual wealthy CEOs with lots of money? After all, in this limited resources worldview, wealth and the creation of wealth is inherently bad. The anti growth, anti human, bitter, envious, vengeance oriented, and overall pessimistic mindset is not going to lead a person to live a fruitful, happy, or prosperous life. It's rather going to induce a huge amount of frustration and bitterness, which may flare up at times into rage and acts of murder, but ultimately induces lassitude. So I make sure how much more I got. All right, got a little bit more left. Cool. Got a little bit more left. Cool. If you have any questions, you can ask them if you want. Try to keep it respectful, but yeah. In the early 1900s, one of the most popular socialist writers and speakers was a friend of Eugene Debs named Wallace D. Wattles. Wattles ran for office on a socialist platform and gave two speeches that were widely circulated as pamphlets, arguing that Jesus Christ's teachings were in line with socialist thought prior to his death in 1911. Waddles was a Christian socialist and friend of Eugene V. Debs, as well as a significant contributor to the New Thought movement, a philosophy that emphasized the thought. Waddles was a Christian socialist and a friend of Eugene Debs, as well as a Waddles was a Christian socialist and a friend of Eugene V. Debs, as well as a significant contributor to the New Thought movement, a philosophy that emphasized the power of thought, personal growth, and spiritual principles to achieve success. Long before Norman Vincent Peale wrote about the power of positive thinking, Wallace Waddles introduced these ideas in The Science of Getting Rich, a seminal work that remains influential today. In his book, which emphasized the importance of maintaining an optimistic and growth oriented perspective, he said in very socialistic terms that the road to happiness and success lies in cultivating the very opposite mindset one finds in modern leftists. He wrote, "A seed dropped into the ground springs into activity, and in the act of living produces 100 more seeds. Life by itself multiplies itself. It is forever becoming more. It must do so if it continues to be at all. Intelligence is under this same necessity for continuous increase. Every thought we think makes it necessary for us to think another thought. Consciousness is continually expanding. Every fact we learn leads us to the learning of another fact. Knowledge is continually increasing. Every talent we cultivate brings to the mind the desire to cultivate another talent. We are subject to the urge of life, seeking expression, whichever drives us on to know more, to do more, and to be more. In order to know more, do more, and be more, we must have more. We must have things to use. We must have things to use, for we learn and do and become only by using things. We must get rich so that we can live more. The desire for riches is simply the capacity for a larger life seeking fulfillment. Every desire is the effort of an unexpressed possibility to come into action. It is power seeking to manifest which causes desire. That which makes you want more money is the same that which makes you want more money is the same that which makes you want more money is the same that which makes the plant grow more. That which makes you want more money is the same that which makes the plant grow. It is life seeking fuller expression. As someone who advocated for the central planning of the means of production, Waddles urged his readers As someone who advocated for the central planning of the means of production, Waddles urged his readers even to think of the capitalist ruling class in a very different way than one has come to expect from socialists in our time, who preach jealousy and vengeance and find satisfaction in the killing of Brian Thompson. He wrote, Men of the he wrote, Men of the plutocratic type, who become very rich, do He wrote, Men of the plutocratic type, who become very rich, do so sometimes purely by their extraordinary ability on the plane of competition, and sometimes they unconsciously relate themselves to substance in its great purposes and movements for the general racial upbuilding through industrial evolution. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, et al. Have been the unconscious agents of the supreme and the necessary work of Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, et al. Have been the unconscious agents of the Supreme in this necessary work of systematizing and organizing productive industry. And in the end, their work will contribute immensely toward increased life for all. Their day is nearly over. They have organized production and will soon be succeeded by the They have organized production and will soon be succeeded by the agents of the multitude, who will organize the machinery of distribution. The multimillionaires are like the monster reptiles of the prehistoric eras. They play a necessary part in the evolutionary process, but the same power which produced them will dispose of them. Waddles argued that socialism was the inevitable Waddles argued that socialism was the inevitable result of human society's march towards greater abundance, but it could only be achieved when the working class was awakened to an abundance mindset. So the factory workers, either as individuals or as a class, are not deprived of opportunity. The workers are not being kept down by their masters. They are not being ground by the trusts and combinations of capitals. They are not being ground by the trusts and combinations of capital. As a class, they are where they are because they do not do things in a certain way. If the workers of America chose to do so, they could follow the example of their brothers in Belgium and in other countries and establish great department stores and cooperative industries. They could elect men of their own class to office and pass laws favoring the development of such cooperative industries. And in a few years, they could take peaceable possession of the industrial field. The working class may become the master class whenever they will begin to do things in a certain way. The law of wealth is the same for them as it is for all others. They must they must learn, and they will remain where they are as long as they continue to do as they do. Waddles put forward a conception of understanding the struggles of workers for a better life in an optimistic rather than bitter and resentful way, seeing it as a natural process of human growth and evolution, not a bitter struggle for power. Nature is a great advancing presence, working beneficiently for the happiness of all. All things in nature are good. She has no evil. She is not complete, for creation is still unfinished, but she is going on to give to man even more bountifully than she has given to him in the past. Nature is a partial expression of God, and God is love. She is perfect, but not complete. So of human society and government, what though are there what though there are trusts and combinations of capital and strikes and lockouts and so on? All these things are part of the forward movement. They are incidental to the evolutionary process of completing society. When it is complete, there will be no more of these inharmonies, but it cannot be completed without them. J.P. Morgan is as necessary to the coming social order as the strange animal of the age of reptiles were to the life of the succeeding world. And just as these animals were perfect after their kind, so Morgan is perfect after his kind. Behold, it is all very good. See, so, see society, government, and industry as being perfect now, and as advancing rapidly towards being complete. Then you will understand that there is nothing to fear, no cause for anxiety, nothing to worry about. Never complain of any of these things. They are perfect. This is the very best possible world for the stage of development man has reached. This will sound like rank folly to many, perhaps to most people. What? They will say. Are not child labor and the exploitation of men and women Are not child labor and the exploitation of men and women in filthy and unsanitary factories evil things? Are not saloons evil? Do you mean to say that we shall accept all these and call them Do you mean to say that we shall accept all these and call them good? Child labor and similar things are no more evil than the way of living and the habits and practices of the cave dweller were evil. His ways were those of the savage stage of man's growth, and for that stage they were perfect. Our industrial practices are those of the savage stage of industrial development, and they are also perfect. In line with his worldview, Waddles put forward a very different perspective on what kind of art and what kind of messages should be relayed to society by those who want to see a socialist world. He wrote, "The more you talk and think about your hard times, the more you will be inclined to seek the more you talk and think about your hard times, the more you will be inclined to seek some mental narcotic to dull the keen edge of your suffering, and the longer you will suffer. No surer way to keep the masses poor can be devised than to continually write and talk about their poverty. Talk about the good time coming. The good time is coming, and the rapidity of its coming is an exact position. The good time is coming, and the rapidity of its coming is in exact proportion to the number of people who think about it and talk about it. Instead of going about showing horrible pictures of the condition of those who live in the tenements, go about showing beautiful pictures of the conditions of those who live. Instead of going about showing Instead of going about showing horrible pictures of the conditions of Instead of going about showing horrible conditions of the condition of those who live in tenements, go about showing pictures of the conditions of those who live. Instead of going about showing horrible Instead of going about showing horrible pictures of the condition of those who live in the tenements, go about showing beautiful pictures of the conditions of those who will live in the coming city. If you can inspire one person to go to work for the coming city, you have done more good than you can by sending 10 people out with slaves and plasterers to relieve existing distress. Instead of crusading against child labor and bad factory conditions, tell the working people what splendid conditions they will have when they wake up and begin to operate the industries for themselves. The masses are not in bondage to anything but ignorance and intellectual laziness. They can have what they think if they will begin to think. They can have what they will if they begin to think. While Waddles was an idealist rather than a materialist, and with the acknowledgement that those seeking a great man to follow could, in theory, lean too far and ignore the struggles of working people or the obstacles and contradictions that must be overcome, one must admit that in the statues found in the Moscow subways, the murals one sees of Venezuela, or the architecture of Pyongyang, the sentiments put forward by Wallace D. Waddles are quite prescient. In the artistic school, the CIA looked to push against with abstract expressionism. In socialist realism, we do not see grunge, dirt, poverty, or calls for cathartic vengeance. Likewise, we do not see the bitterness and the lassitude that eventually comes from it. Instead, we see a glowing hope, a glorification of collective strength and energy. When we look at this art, we do not feel powerless, but rather when we look at this art, we do not feel powerless. When we look at this art, we do not feel powerless, but rather we feel we can join this exciting project to build a brave new world. We feel emboldened, awakened, and energized. It should be no surprise that this ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, The dissolution of alienation and the ecstatic feelings of community is something many millions of our tax dollars have been spent trying to eradicate. It shouldn't be shocking that it shouldn't be shocking that hundreds and hundreds of pages have been written by CIA-backed leftist intellectuals and academics, inoculating us against this kind of message and the feelings it evokes as fascist. And that's the end of that. That is the end of that. So, if anybody has any questions, let me stop sharing this. Stop sharing. If anybody has any questions, you can ask if you want. I'll stay on for any questions. Try to keep it respectful. For anybody that's probably been affected by these, but that's in the vicinity of this, affected by these wildfire, Canada wildfires. How are the conditions by if you in these if you're being affected by these conditions? So I know I had to go into the city a few days ago, and I'm like, it's still rather smoky. Still rather smoky. Smokier than I thought it would be after the initial fires in there. Still, I think that's still going on, actually. Mm-hmm. Maybe before anything bad happens, let me save this project so I don't have any oopsies. Yeah, cool. In case you're wondering, I do have the AC on, so if you're saying why do I have a hoodie on, I do have the AC on, so okay. And actually, if you saw the program that I was using, the DAW that I was using, it's a digital DAW, short for digital audio workstation. It's called Reaper. That's what I use if I had to record something like long form narration or some music or whatnot, and do editing on it, and do some editing on it as well. Anybody has any questions? If not, I'll hop off this stream. It's kind of a ask me anything chill Saturday. I really, 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 really hope Spain beats Argentina tomorrow. We do not want a Zionist entity winning this World Cup. Though I have a bad feeling. I have a bad feeling they're gonna pull some shenanigans, pull some BS for tomorrow. Mhm. No questions. Nobody's gonna ask something. You know what? Let me pull that. Let me pull that back up. Okay, okay, that, got that. Yeah, actually, you know what? Pull this back up. Add to stage. Get this going. Whoa. Since the start of the war. Woo. Let's see. March, yeah, that should be. Okay. What we do that. Put on. I'll probably definitely have to put on some noise reduction. All right. That's right. You can't see this. This is a separate window. All right. What I pulled up is a an effect for noise reduction, basically. So what I'm going to do, well, you probably won't be, definitely won't be able to hear it, but I'm basically going to do like try to reduce some of the background noise throughout. So Actually, this might be a better program I could probably use for what I want. Remove. Actually, there might be a better program. No, it's not it. Not it. Not it. Not it. Not it. Remove. Let's see. This is it. This is it. Okay. All right. Let's see. No. There we go. There. So basically, what I'll do is build in a noise profile. Build in it so that what it's going to do is going to subtract or reduce the background noise when all right. Okay. And, there we go. Go. There we go. And take this repeat off. Probably did what I wanted to do. And actually, while I'm doing this, I probably should make this. There we go. Yeah. So I get more precise editing. I get more precise editing. There we go. Go. Actually, if I'm going to be doing that, let me have this up. No. No. All right. Oh, should be good. All right, let's try something else. That's not what I want to do. I had to really catch this program. It's better. It's a cleaner sound. There we go. There we go. If you if you have any questions, I don't mind you asking them. Try to keep it respectful as always. As always. Oh, there we go. Unless you want to watch me do some editing, it's gonna be a while. There we go. Excuse me. Excuse me. There we go. Mhm. There we go. Just so you know, editing is boring work, but a necessary evil. This type of stuff. There we go. There we go. No, that's not what I wanted. Okay, there we go. There we go. All right. When I'm doing editing like this, it's important to keep saving. You don't want to come back, see what the hell happened to my project, and then start all over. That would be horrible. All right. I'm going to take a little break, and I'll probably come back to this. I'm going to take a little break, and I'm going to call that stream here. And see everyone in the next one.